Welcome to another tutorial on working with C#, following Tony Gaddis' book for this course. This tutorial is going to show you how to solve a class-based problem. We're going to look at problem 10-4 from the book, dealing with employees and their information that you might need to present to somebody running your application. So I'm going to start off from scratch. I'm going to go from scratch to finish in this particular example. So I'm going to create a new project. Again, since we've used it before, it's right here at the top. It's a Windows Forms app. Next, I'm going to call it Employee Class. And I'm going to save this project in my projects folder in my data drive. Again, wherever you're comfortable with storing your projects, it's going to be up to you. So I'm going to select that folder. It'll come back after it's created the folder. Okay. And it'll put it into a project based on that. So I'm going to go ahead and create. Okay. So let me expand this to fit my recording area. Now, I'm going to proceed on this with a certain level of understanding of what you already know. I'm going to just go in here and start work on this project. The only thing we need to do on this form is probably go ahead and change the name of it. And I'm going to call it, and this is more decorative than anything. So I grabbed the wrong thing. Excuse me. That's why it rejected my result. Oh, come on. There it is. That's what I was looking for. Okay. So that's in there. I need to open the toolbox. And the only thing we're going to look for here is a list box. And for this exercise, I just need a little bit of a width, and I'm only going to have a few lines, so I'm going to leave it about that size. And let's say I want to give the list box a name of LB Imp, because that's going to be where our employees are going to go. Okay. And that's all I really need to do on that. And then I'm going to go ahead and open up our code for our form. And as always, there's not much there. So we'll just start chipping away at what we need to do. Okay, so this application doesn't have any real functionality as far as interacting with the user. It's just going to open up a window and create a list of employees in our text box, and the assignment tells us what it needs to know. We need to have a name, an ID number, a department, and a position. So that's going to be our data or properties for each employee. We also need to create a class that's going to use overloaded constructors, and it's going to have one constructor that's going to use the employee's name, ID number, department, and position. Basically give it all the data. And we also need a constructor that's only going to take the employee's name and ID number. And we also need a parameterless constructor that assigns empty strings to the name, department, and position properties and 0 to the ID number. We also have a set of given users. Okay, so once we've got that understood, we can start working on this project. So before we can actually do anything, one of the things we need to do is add a public form1 load method. Oh, I'm sorry, excuse me. And one of the things that we need to do is recognize the list box that we're going to work with. And to do that, we're just going to use the list box imp dot list item and we're just going to give it one long string to make everything orderly and basically give a label line across the top of our list box. So let's see, we need name and ID number, and of course name is kind of short, so I'm going to put 2 tabs in there. We can adjust this after we get it running. We have an ID number. That's kind of long, so I'll give it 1 tab. Then we also have our department and position. So that's all we need for that. Now, before we can go any further with this part of the code in the employee class namespace, we need something else, and that's going to be another C# file that's going to contain a class. To do that, I simply right-click on the project name, go down here to add new item, and we're going to create a class, and we're going to give it a class name, pretty obvious, of employee. And boom, just like that, it gets created automatically for us. Notice that the namespace is the same automatically, so it's always good to make sure of that, but it should by default make that correct for you. And so now we're going to do some of the things that are explained in the book, and I'll try to reference the section of the book as we go through this. So the first thing we need to do are creating the properties that are internal to this class. So these will be private, and we're going to use an underscore naming convention And again, this is not concrete. This is not absolute. And probably wherever you go to program, if it's in a large group, they will have their own conventions about this type of documentation. So again, these are just the properties that the project or the problem asked us to use. Okay, so that is just all the properties. I'm just going to go ahead and start doing a little bit of internal documentation here, and that way it's just a good habit to get into declaring what kind of property or what kind of things we're working on in this problem. So I've gone ahead and added another label, and then we're going to start entering our constructors. So I need to do a public employee with no parameters. And again, this one is just because that's what was required by the problem statement. So we're just going to go through and enter in blank values for all of these. Okay, so that's all there is to that one. Obviously, this is about as simple as a constructor gets. And then the next constructor, we need to pass it the name and ID number. So it's going to be basically the same. So I'm just going to do a little bit of a shortcut here. Copy this, paste it, go up here and change my parameter list. And we want to give it a string name and a int ID number. All right, and so here I'm going to give it the name and ID number. And just like that, we have our second constructor created. And then lastly, we need to create another one that's going to have all of the data filled in. So we'll need string name, int ID number, string department, and string position. And then we just need to go in here again, just like we did before, and give it the information that is being passed. That would not be good. Okay, so all of our constructors are made. And again, the whole issue of setting up a lot of this starts on page 585, where it talks about the class construction. So that's all we're doing right now. Now, one of the things that we really need to take care of is a basic functionality of C++, C# classes, and that is the getters and setters, as they're sometimes referred to. So what I'm going to do now is, for each of our properties, we need to have an external way to make them be allowed to get and set the value. So we're going to start off by just working with the public string name item, and then we'll just go from there. And again, because this is external facing, it needs to be public. Again, I'm just adding a little comment. So public string name, and then we're just going to do a generic get. All right, so since we're getting, what we need to do is give it a return value that is going to come from underscore name. And that's all there is to the get. And then we'll do a set. And we're going to do name equals value. And that's all there is to that getter and setter for the string value. Now, for some reason, we're getting a get as oh, I did this one backwards. Okay. This should be a return, right? Because it is just getting the name. I was jumping ahead in my mind to this. By the way, that can be a real bad thing to do if you start getting into that. So always be focused on the thing you're working at hand. So now we just need to do the exact same thing for the other three items in our property list. And there we go. So we've got all of our code set up in our class file that we're going to use to make this all happen. And again, the getters and setters are described on page 594. So if you want to have something to review, that's a good way to do it. So that should be all we need from there. So I'm going to just save this file. Now we can start making use of it in our form. Because once we've created our object label in our list box, then we can start creating new classes, making new employees from our class, and just move on from there. So to do that, I just need to give it a name, and so that's just is all we need to do to make that happen. Okay, so once I've created that, then I just need to start adding employees And I'm going to base that on the information I have from our problem statement. Some of this is a little bit grunt work, but it is the nature of the beast. Oops. Visual Studio wouldn't have allowed me to build that, so it would have caught that error. Okay, so I've got all the data entered for our first employee. Now I just need to add the this new employee to the list box. So just like we did with the label line, I'm going to do a lb imp.items.add, and it's this time I need to actually give it this information, so I'm just going to do a imp1.name plus tab plus int imp1.id number dot to string. And again, we have to do that because we can't pass what is essentially, or add a non-string to a string. It'll definitely throw an error at that point. Imp1 dot department plus tab. Now, for the observant, you'll notice I just forgot to add another tab after number, so I need to go back and correct that. Okay, and plus imp1 dot position. And that's all we need to do, except we need to close it out. And that should be all we need. So at this point, we've got enough that we can actually do a test and see if this is going to work. So let me save this. That's saved. Let's go ahead and finish product. Okay, so we've got some lining up and resizing to do. So let's just do that real quick. So I need to make that worked. What I think I needed to make that a double tab. And let me just go back to the save that. go back to our actual form and let's increase the size of this. Save it and run it again. And by golly, we got it right. So now we can go back to our application, and to meet the requirements from our problem statement, we just need to basically copy this chunk and do it over and over again until we get all of the employees that we. Of course, I can correct that to submit, but there we go. There. So now we just want to run this again to make sure it all works. And there we go. Everything's lined up, all the data's in there, and we've more than met the requirements. Although I did add in my own name and so forth, but you get the gist of it. So that's all there is to working with C#'s class capabilities.